if those were okay. Uh, so they tell me we don't have internet. I say, okay. So I print to make sure that I go through. Because I have most of the stuff is up here, but, I like to have those to make sure I don't miss points. And these guys pulled it out. I don't know how they did that, but that's cool. So that makes me glad because I prefer to look up there real quick than to look at these things and have to flip through. It's very cumbersome. So we are in 2 Samuel chapter 3, and things are getting interesting. 2 Samuel chapter 3. I went ahead and gave you an outline of the chapter. I don't always do that, but whenever I do, it's because I think of a way to make it flow. And so the M's made it happen: mutiny, murder, and mourning. That makes it helpful. That I believe that's called alliteration, and that's preachers are fond of that. So we were able to do that in this chapter, but we are going to continue on. So we're going to read kind of a big chunk to get that first episode, so to speak, out of the way. So we're going to look at verses 1 through 25. It all just kind of flows. So that's why we're going to read through that at once. So we'll go through those verses now. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 3, and we're going to start in verse 1. Now there was long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David waxed stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul waxed weaker and weaker. And unto David were sons born in Hebron, and his firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam. Ahinoam. I always mess the names up. The Jezreelitess, and his second was Helab of Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And the third, Absalom. Some of these names are extremely important to remember. The son of Maachah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. And the fourth, Adonijah, it's another name to remember, the son of Haggith. And the fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithraim by Eglah, David's wife. These were born to David in Hebron. Remember, he was anointed as king in Hebron. That's a city in Judah. The people of Judah came to him. They anointed him king over the house of Judah. There is a division, right, in the land, and so that's what's going on right now. And this is where he's at. He reigns in Judah or in Hebron for about 7.5 years. Verse 6, and it came to pass while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David that Abner made himself strong for the house of Saul. And Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, Wherefore hast thou gone into my father's concubine? Then was Abner very wroth for the words of Ishbosheth, and said, Am I a dog's head, which against Judah do show kindness this day unto the house of Saul thy father, to his brethren and to his friends, and have not delivered thee into the hand of David, that thou chargest me today with a fault concerning this woman? So do God to Abner, and more also, except as the Lord hath sworn to David, even so I do to him, to translate the kingdom from the house of Saul, and to set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba. And he could not answer Abner a word again, because he feared him. And Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf, saying, Whose is the land? Saying also, Make thy league with me, or make a covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with thee, to bring about all Israel unto thee. And he said, Well, I will make a league with thee, but one thing I require of thee, that is, thou shalt not see my face, except thou first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when thou comest to see my face. And David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, Deliver me my wife Michal, which I espoused to me for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, even from Phaltiel, the son of Laish, and her husband went with her along weeping behind her to Bahurim. Then said Abner unto him, Go, return. And he returned. And Abner had communication with the elders of Israel, saying, You sought for David in times past to be king over you. Now then, do it. For the Lord hath spoken to David, saying, By the hand of my servant David I will save my people Israel out of the hand of the Philistines and out of the hand of all their enemies. And Abner also spake in the ears of Benjamin. And Abner went also to speak in the ears of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel, and that seemed good to the whole house of Benjamin. So Abner came to David to Hebron, and 20 men with him. And David made Abner and the men that were with him a feast. And Abner said unto David, I will arise and go, and will gather all Israel unto my lord the king, that they may make a league with thee, that thou mayest reign over all that thine heart desireth. And David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. And behold, the servants of David, Joab, came from pursuing a troop, that is, they were out on raids, and brought in a great spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he was gone in peace. When Joab and all the host that was with him were come, they told Joab, saying, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he hath sent him away, and he is gone in peace. Then Joab came to the king and said, What hast thou done? Behold, Abner came unto thee. Why is it that thou hast sent him away, and he is quite gone? Thou knowest Abner, the son of Ner, that he came to deceive thee, and to know thy going out and thy coming in, and to know all that thou doest. All right. Whew, that's a lot in one sitting, I know. So we've got this situation. Remember, the house of Saul, his son's name is Ishbosheth, right? And the commander of the army over Saul's army, and that is still over the commanding the army, his name is Abner. And so Abner is really the guy who seems to be pulling the strings in Israel. He's the one who took Ishbosheth and made him king. He installed him. There was no seeking God. There was no trying to start anything. It was just he took him, he set him up. And now they're off, coming off the heels of this loss with David and his men. Remember, that was recorded in chapter 2. They've had that loss. They've been fighting one another, and this war's going on, and they're losing. It says that David grows stronger and stronger while the house of Saul grows weaker and weaker. So these guys are losing, and Ishbosheth, he does something that maybe wasn't the wisest choice. Remember, we've had this discussion already. Choose your words carefully, right? That's a lesson that we see throughout Scripture and that we've already seen in our study. But he comes to Abner and he hurls an accusation at him. Why have you gone in and laid with my father's concubine, Rizpah? Now, by rights, that concubine, who's not the concubines didn't have the full rights as a wife per se, but they were still protected and they were a little bit lower in status, if you will. But as the deceased king passed, then his harem would pass to his successor. Okay, so Rizpah would have rightfully been the property, so to speak, of Ishbosheth. So he throws this accusation at him. Why have you been with her? Now, the text doesn't say whether Abner really was or really wasn't. Abner does get offended, right? He gets upset with him. Why are you saying this? Why would you put a fault at me with this woman? Now, that could indicate the way that the scholars look at the Hebrew, and it could, the way that the phrasing he uses in Hebrew, it could point towards him being offended that there's some kind of fault, or it could also go the way of him trying to deny that he ever was with her in the first place, if that makes sense. One side would be, why are you complaining about this? This isn't a big deal. Why are you trying to make this into an accusation or make this into a big deal versus I didn't do this at all? So it's a little, according to those guys who know the Hebrew far greater than I do, that's something they bring up. But Abner does get offended. Now, why is Abner so hot? And why is this such a potential pressure point? It's a concubine, right? You got to put yourself in the shoes of the individuals in ancient times, not modern, okay? So we got to go back to that. She doesn't have the full rights of a wife. Essentially, she's kind of like property. Why is Ishbosheth so upset? Anybody got a guess? No. This accusation carries with it some implications. So if you go to 1 Kings, I've got it listed there, chapter 2, we're going to run into another situation involving a concubine. Verse 13 says this. And Adonijah, remember I said that was a name? Whose son is it? Adonijah is the son of David. And Adonijah, whose mother, the son of Haggith, but this is one of David's wives, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. And she said, Comest thou peaceably? And he said, Peaceably. He said, Moreover, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And she said, Say on. And he said, Thou knowest that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel set their faces on me, that I should reign. Howbeit the kingdom is turned about, and has become my brother's. For it was his from the Lord. And now I ask one petition of thee, deny me not. And she said unto him, Say on. And he said, Speak, I pray thee, unto Solomon the king, for he will not say thee nay. And that he give me Abishag the Shunammite to wife. And Bathsheba said, Well, I will speak for thee unto the king. Bathsheba therefore went unto King Solomon to speak unto him for Adonijah. And the king rose up to meet her, and bowed himself unto her, and sat down on his throne, and caused a seat to be set for the king's mother, and she sat on his right hand. And then she said, I desire one small petition of thee. I pray thee, say me not nay. And the king said unto her, Ask on, my mother, for I will not say thee nay. And she said, Let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah thy brother to wife. And King Solomon answered and said unto his mother, And why dost thou ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also? For he is mine elder brother, even for him, and for Abiathar the priest, and for Joab the son of Zeruiah, the king of Solomon, swear by the Lord, saying, God, do so to me, and more also, if Adonijah have not spoken this word against his own life. Now therefore, as the Lord liveth, which hath established me, and set me on the throne of David my father, and who hath made me an house, as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death this day. And King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he fell upon him that day. So did y'all read that? Or here we had this situation. So I know we've jumped ahead many moons in the story. But in this situation, David has passed away, and his son Solomon is now reigning in his stead. But before Solomon was established as king, there was another one of David's son, Adonijah, who had made a play at the kingship. He had actually gotten the support of the priesthood, specifically of the high priest, and he'd also garnered the support of Joab, commander of the army. And they were going through and announcing that he was the king. And so then Nathan and Bathsheba go to David, and they're like, hey, so Adonijah's done this, and you're going to have to deal with it. So David goes and installs Solomon as king. He gives him some final words, and that's how Solomon comes in over Adonijah. But in these final days, David struggled physically. He describes him as not being able to get warm. And so the idea from his servants was, well, let's go get you a pretty girl and bring her into your harem, is the summarization. And she can lay with you. She can hold on to you, and she can bring some body heat, essentially. And that's what she did. And it says that there wasn't any relations between them, but she would come and she would comfort and serve the king. So this is Abishag, and she was said to be very pretty, very beautiful. So now Adonijah has been taken from his position that he thought he was going to have. I'm going to be the next king. That's been removed. Solomon's installed, and he goes and he asks Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, can you do me a favor? Look, everybody thought I was going to be king. Everybody was expecting it. But I guess that's just not in God's cards. So would you do me a great favor? Would you just, can I just have Abishag, the Shunammite? Can I just have her? Bathsheba says, sure. I don't think that's a big deal. I'll talk to Solomon for you. And so she does. She goes and she speaks to Solomon. And Solomon's very respectful towards his mother. He bows himself to her. The king bows himself to the queen mother. He has a seat caused to be set at his right hand. And she sits there and he says, go ahead, Mom. Share with me whatever's on your heart. I'm not going to tell you no. And she says, well, then why don't, do me a favor. Don't tell me no to this, but can Abishag be given to your brother or your half-brother, Adonijah? And all of a sudden, Solomon flips a switch. Why in the world are you asking that for Adonijah? Why don't you just go ahead and try to give him the kingdom? You see, taking the concubine of the deceased king would be seen as a backdoor claim or attempt to claim the throne. That's how commentators have understood it. Adonijah had already practiced that. He'd already tried to take the kingdom even while David was still alive. He was trying to set himself up as the co-regent in that time frame, as being established as the next king over Israel, and was denied that. And so making that move would be either to try to claim the throne, or if you take the concubine of the deceased king and you were to have a child with that concubine, then there might be some type of claim to your child being the next claim to the throne. Does that make sense? She was one of the king's wives, and I've gotten her, and now she's had my child, and so I think that there's some type of claim there. Could garner support. I don't know where you're going. Oh, I see where you're at. Yeah, but as a concubine, they really wouldn't. They would kind of be less of a status. So, yeah, possibly so. Possibly so. I didn't come across that. I'm not saying that wouldn't be there, but I see where you're going. I see where you're at. So, but it's trying to make that claim. It's a claim to authority. It's a claim to taking power, and that's why it's not going to be looked at very well by Ishbosheth. It's not going to be looked at very well by Solomon. It's not going to be. It wouldn't be received well by other rulers. And so that's what's going on. He levels this accusation at it, and Abner gets really upset. He says, "My gosh, am I a dog's head?" I mean, dogs were unclean. It was an insult to be called that. And so, according to Judaism, at this time even, dogs were unclean, and that statement would be a cutting insult to be called a dog. And so he's saying, I've been faithful to I've been serving your father's house. I've been making sure that you've got a position. I've been making sure to hold all this stuff together, and you're gonna make a big deal about this. You know what? I'm done. I'm going to give everything to David. Abner understands who he is. He's like, hey, I've got this position. So we've said he's the puppet, right? He's the guy, he's pulling the strings. He's not the king, but he's the one behind the king who's doing everything. He's the man behind the curtain. That's very obvious in these verses from chapter 3, because he says, I'm going to give it to David. I'm going to take the kingdom from the house of Saul, and I'm going to put David up over the house of Israel from Judah, and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba. Dan to Beersheba, that's a common phrase in Scripture in the Old Testament, and it would refer to the uttermost parts of the kingdom. at that time, whenever that saying was utilized, either here or even by prophets or throughout the Old Testament. That's what it would represent. He makes all those statements, and after he makes it, Ishbosheth, who is king, he doesn't refute him. He's actually afraid of him. So that completely supports the statement that Abner's the guy who's in charge. Because Ishbosheth, the guy who's supposed to be in charge, is too afraid to do anything. He doesn't call for his execution. I mean, this guy said, I'm done with you. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take everything and bring it to David, and that's going to be it. And Ishbosheth don't do anything about it. He don't even say anything about it. He's too afraid. So Abner practices some good politics, and he sends messengers. That's a wise choice. You can roll to the next slide. I mean, he is the commander of the army for Ishbosheth, so it wouldn't be wise for him to go to David on his own right off the bat. So he sends messengers as representatives, and he says, look, you know what? Let's make a covenant together. I would love to just get this thing ironed out. You can be the king, and we'll work together in this. David says, that sounds good to me. I'd like to make that covenant with you, sure, but I need something. I need you to bring me my first wife, Michal, Saul's daughter. Y'all remember her from way back when? She was the one that took the household idol and made it look like David was sick in the bed, and whenever the spies were there going to try to kill David before he had to go live in the wilderness and his life on the run as a fugitive, she was the one who helped him escape. She loved him. Remember, that's what was recorded in Scripture, that she had loved him, and so that pleased Saul, that she cared so much for David, because he thought, this can be the thing that I use to trap him. I can get him through her. And so the only thing that Saul required of David for a dowry, for a bride price, instead of any money, was 100 foreskins of Philistines, which David went and got 200 foreskins of Philistines and brought them and presented them, counted them before King Saul. And so he took Michal to be his wife. But after David went on the run, Saul, who didn't really have the right, seems to have dissolved that marriage and given her to another man. David didn't write her a bill of divorce. It was allowed under the Mosaic law. They could write, if a wife does not please her husband, then the husband may give her a bill of divorce. And if she wants to be married to another man, she may. And whenever she marries that other man, if he is not pleased with her, then he could also write her a bill of divorce. But the first man under the Mosaic law was not to be remarried to the former wife because she had been with another man, and he wasn't to go back to her. So, he presents that demand to Abner. He presents that demand also to Ishbosheth. David doesn't, he goes ahead and just puts it out there for everybody. I want my wife back. Give her to me. Now, I think, I'll stop before I share what I think. But David had put this demand out there, and he'd spoken it. Some will interpret David's actions as wrong. I bring this up because it's going to be in commentaries. If you're going to refer to multiple commentaries or multiple study Bibles, there's a good chance you're going to run into differing opinions on what David should have done with regard to Michal. I would present you with a bit of information before you form an opinion necessarily. But whenever you go to Deuteronomy 17:17, Deuteronomy 17 is the passage where we find the expectations for the king of Israel. Right? There's two required positions: judges, priests. These are required. You shall have these, God says. The language shifts. When you go into the land and you desire to have a king over you, like the nations that are around you, you may have a king, but And he sets out expectations for the king. In verse 17, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. Some see David as calling for Michal not a good choice because she's already been married to another man. Some say it's rightfully his wife. He never divorced her. The law says the king's not supposed to multiply wives unto himself. I think you got to consider all that whenever you go to forming an opinion. Does God automatically smack you down whenever you know you're doing something you're not supposed to? Okay. He don't do it to me either. Exactly. Just because things occur in Scripture doesn't mean that God approves. This is narrative. We're reading the story, remember? Whenever we read narrative of anybody's life, you're going to find good, you're going to find bad, you're going to find ugly. You're going to find things that God approves of, you're going to find things that God doesn't approve of. Personally, it wasn't wise for the next king to multiply wives unto himself. To armchair quarterback David would have been to say, you should have waited until you got what was coming to you by the hand of the Lord and then called for Michal to be your wife again at the very least. And stuck with the wife that you had. But that's my opinion. God allows David to have multiple wives, and he does call for Michal, and I believe that he cared for her. I believe that he loved her. I think that, they had a relationship. I think he desired that, but there's also, I don't think that you can avoid the reality that by bringing in the daughter of Saul back to his house, that's going to be good politics. Saul's dead, and David's trying to unite the entire kingdom and rule over it. It's going to be a wise choice from a political standpoint to bring in Saul's daughter. David is always going to try to do right. Now, I believe this comes from the word that he gave Saul, which stems from his devotion to God and trying to do what's right by God, because he had been committed to the house of Saul and to not harming the house of Saul with regard to killing him, with regard to not killing Jonathan. And so I think he's still going to show that kindness to Michal, his once and now again wife. Because when Abner comes, it doesn't explicitly state it, but he's received with a feast, him and his men. So it would imply that he brought Michal with him, because David said, you're not going to see my face unless you have her with you. So it implies. And we do know from later on in the story, in the account of David, that she is in his home. She doesn't bear him children, but that's a whole another lesson. He has multiple wives, and part of that is what's going to be the definition of multiple. He's not supposed to multiply. It doesn't expressly condemn him having maybe a couple or something to that effect, maybe an argument that someone would want to present. And God is able to take David's choice, and he is able to take from Bathsheba an adulterous relationship and establish Solomon as king, because that's who God had chosen to serve as the next king over Israel after David. Not Amnon the firstborn. Not Adonijah. Solomon. We'll get there too. Maybe there's questions or comments over that. Because David has, I think, somewhere in the ballpark of 18, 19 plus children through multiple women. You can cross-reference that with 2 Samuel. You can also look in some of this you can cross-reference with 2 Samuel, but you can also look at First Chronicles. In that, I forget exactly the chapter, but that's where you're going to find these names repeated. But if there's no other questions, you can roll to the next slide. All right. So he practices politics. We talked about that. They throw a feast. David throws the feast. Abner brings the wife. Joab thinks it's horrible whenever he shows up to trust Abner. Why? Yep. He has a couple of links. That's what he says, right? It's like he's trying to check out when you're going, when you're coming, what you got, what you're doing. He's just spying on you. He doesn't mean it. This isn't real to him. He does have a connection to him. He was the commander of Saul's army, but he's also part of Saul's family. He's not a direct descendant, but he is related to him. Dokie dokie. Mm-hmm.
Now, all of this, what we're going through right here, how does that square with this verse?
I think it's a good question. But Jesus, I think an answer that Jesus gives on divorce helps reconcile it. I might be confusing my chapters. But when Jesus was asked about divorce, if a man could divorce his wife for any reason, Jesus answered and said, "Do you not know that Moses included this because of the hardness of your heart?" Right? This was included in the law because of the hardness of your heart. But that he who created them in the beginning created them male and female, and so that the two were to become one flesh. And therefore what God joins together, let no man tear asunder, right? But Jesus makes it clear there are things that have been put into the law to provide a level of protection against the sinfulness of man's heart. Having multiple wives, getting divorced, things like that goes against God's design. I agree. God laid out a design for marriage in Genesis. But God, in his foreknowledge, provided law that would also protect when people were disobedient. Because there's a level of protection that's going to be necessary for the wives that have been divorced, for the concubines, and things of that nature. So it doesn't square. I don't believe that it's right for them to have multiple wives as far as overall God's design. But God allowed things to occur in his patience. In similar fashion as to how he allows things to occur in our lives with patience. That would be my best answer. But I mean, we can discuss it further, if that makes sense. How does having more than one wife square with God's plan? Let alone a concubine, I guess what I'm getting at. Exactly. See, that's the thing. When it comes to polygamy, and we talked about this, I believe we talked about this at the beginning of 1 Samuel when we started studying Samuel because of Hannah and Peninnah, right? These two wives of Elkanah, and there were a rivalry between them, and Hannah was loved more than Peninnah and all this, right? And again, This is part of the story. People make choices that are contrary to God's design, contrary to what God wills, right? I mean, we do that today. Do we gossip? Do we get angry without cause? Do we know those things are wrong? Yes. Because if not, then we're lying. And that's wrong. We make choices that we know we ought not make. That happens. Same thing here. We're reading narrative. I don't think it's wise. Every time we read about polygamy, I love the answer. You don't want one. Extra wives, concubines, having more than one wife always troubles the situation. It's not presented in a good light. You had Solomon, who had approximately 300 concubines and 700 wives. And part of what they'll do, and remember, we're separated. We got to go back to this too. We're separated from what we read here by time, by distance and geography, by culture, and by language. We are separated from these people. And much of what we're reading right now, we get to armchair quarterback, myself included. But we're reading their story. They made choices, and in this, especially in this time and in these situations, they're making marriages to do what many politicians or aspiring politicians would do, and that is create political alliances and relationships through marriage. We see it with Solomon marrying the princess of Egypt. I think that it is fair to go out on the limb and say that David married Michal, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, for such cause. He already had Abigail. He already had Michal, really. He already had Abigail. He has Ahinoam or Hinoam. I always mess her name up. The Jezreelites. He already had these women, but he marries more and more, and he takes even more. And then he takes more concubines. Does that address what is brought up or not address what was brought up? Buddy, what do you think? See wheels turning.
I'm involved today, right now, with a situation, and I just want to put it out here and see what people think about it. Young man, young lady, they announce that they're going to be married in August or somewhere along down in the future. Now, these are churches, very good churches, okay? So they decided to get in a hurry. So on about February, somewhere along there, they took the notion that they'll kind of secretly go and get the preacher and go through a wedding. And we're going to let the family all know, and we're going to let the church family know. Now, they are expecting a child, about a month into that. But they're still going to go through this wedding that they had planned way back there. And here was my take and my advice to the young man. Call that wedding off. For God's sake, call it off. Because you're legally married. You're fixing to have a child. And why go through laws in the real bank because they're very close to it.
I understand that. You want to protect their testimony and their reputation, right? I mean, you're concerned what other people are going to think.
That's exactly what I told the young man.
And not,
Protect your testimony.
so I can understand that. I also understand the reality that it would seem as though that they were. This is checking my audience. I would also suggest, from an outsider's perspective, that they practiced wisdom because they didn't allow themselves to burn with passion. Instead, the two became one, as they should, and they got married, and they did, and now they want to go through with having a ceremony that celebrates that with more people. So they practiced wisdom in protecting their testimony as they ought, and got married. And now, yes, to outsiders who look at it, they may say, well, those guys have been shacking up. They may. They may not. But I understand the desire. I am sympathetic towards the desire, especially of the young lady, to have a ceremony. I can understand. I'm not going to say, I can't say one way or another whether they should or shouldn't. I'm not that husband. I'm not that wife. I'm not their family. But I will say that if anybody asks, they're not going to have a bad answer. They're going to say, we already got married, but we really wanted to celebrate with our family, with our friends. We had planned this, but the reality is we just wanted to be together. And instead of doing anything the wrong way, we tried to do it the right way. We got married, and now we have the celebration planned, and we just want to go through with it. Depending on how they go through it, I mean, especially if it's really presented as we want to present our vows instead of making new vows. I mean, but that's just my 2 cents. That's just my 2 cents. But I understand where you're coming from. I see that other side of, hey, people may think this about y'all, and that's just not the truth. So I wouldn't be harsh on them.
Digging a little bit deeper into this, have we not took the marriage and the marriage vows and the way that God intended for things to be done between men and women? Have we not got loose in our society today from where we should be?
I think it depends on which perspective you're looking at. I don't know exactly where you're coming from on your where you're saying we've gotten loose. With regard to value of marriage, yes.
Got careless about protecting the institution of marriage, this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think culturally there's overall there's much less value on marriage and the institution of it. Yeah.
I guess to put it a little bit more plain, what disturbs me, and I work with a lot of young people, and that's the biggest thing that I and my wife, my former wife, faced is this thing of shacking up. And they're out there today, young folks think there's nothing in the world wrong with that.
Yeah.
And it's just got to be a common thing. And it's called adultery. It's called fornication. When you get in the Bible and go to looking at it, the Bible hadn't changed its view on that, but we have.
Yeah.
And that breaks my heart. Because it's prevalent.
Yeah.
Very prevalent in our society today.
It has been for a long time. Living together outside of the bonds of marriage has been prevalent in our society for a while. And the more that one generation tolerates, even further will the next generation take it. They'll automatically go to that same toleration point and then exceed it. And that is consistently proved. So I agree with you that people have been disregarding the institution and the bonds of marriage. as a society, we've been doing that, and we're doing it to a rampant degree now. I agree with that. But in this instance, these individuals weren't doing that, correct? The individuals that you're specifically speaking of, they were married, and then they came together to live and to be together. So that's not their. Well, it may, if there is an appearance of it to somebody, I don't know, but thankfully for them, that's not the case for them. Yeah. Yeah.
But the thing about it, they've got a life to live out there in the church. And somewhere along down the line,
But they told their church family they were getting married, right?
oh yeah,
And they told their family they were getting married. So it wasn't really a secret. I mean, it was out there. It was in the community. It was in their families, among their loved ones, among their pastor. They all knew that they were getting married. It's just that to the maybe outsiders who aren't a part of that immediate close community didn't know. So I would, that's my personal take on it. I would be glad that they exercised some wisdom. They didn't burn with passion. They did get married.
people sitting right here,
Yeah.
because, hey, this is real stuff. I don't know where anybody here deals with any of this kind of stuff, but I'm dealing with it all the time.
Yeah.
We're dealing with it next door. We have a man and his wife, been married 44 years, divorcing. The divorce has not gone through, that he has brought in another woman to live there.
She teaches Sunday school.
She teaches the Sunday school class.
It's part of the plan.
We
Destroy the nuclear family.
we do not understand, we don't.
I think that right there, the devil is out to destroy the nuclear family. If he can destroy the nuclear family, he can destroy the nation. Right?
Yep. I don't disagree.
But it's not nothing new. When I was a kid, there was a pastor of the church in Iowa. He left. He took one of the people in the other church's wife and left with him. I knew the man really well, but he took his wife.
No.
So it's been around ever since I was a little kid. I mean, it's not something that's just new.
Well, true. I mean, it's here. It's here.
I may end up having my locations totally dead wrong, and please forgive me by thinking that is the book of Kings that I'm thinking of. Starting off at the very beginning, you have this one man steps up at a young age, reigns for a long time, and he's doing everything right by the Lord. At the very end, falls off the wagon. His son takes over. Same aspect. But then you go down the line till you get to this last guy. Not even with the Lord. Doing everything by his will. Just living his life. Forgetting everything about the Lord.
Yeah.
That's sort of the way that I'm sort of taking how people's looking at, kind of how they were saying the nuclear family. It
Yeah.
used to be that tree, but now, just like that tree, has been knocked down.
Yeah. Before God ever instituted any type of leadership other than his own, he instituted the home. Plain and simple. It's the foundations of society. So, yes, I believe if you destroy the nuclear home, you destroy the nation. And I agree. I think it goes back to what we're talking about. Each generation continually embraces what the previous generation tolerated. They embrace it and take it further. So the issue of shacking up has been an issue for a long time. People living together, having sexual relations together, and not being married, right? That is sinful, directly against the Word of God. Whether they're living together or not, if they're having intercourse, it's against the Word of God, right? That's fornication. Sexual immorality. If one or both are already married, it's adultery. Is what it is. That's been an issue. But as we got more and more lax in it, now we have gotten to the point as a culture where there is no, truth is abstract. There's no absolute truth. And because there's no absolute truth, whatever I want is what is right. So, if I want to call myself a girl, that's fine into society standards. Gabriel can become Gabriella very easily. I can be fluid. I can do that one day. One day I can be Gabriel, the next day I can be Gabriella. Not a big deal to our society, right? One day I can wear a dress. And here's the really scary thing. There are churches, I'll put those in quotations. There are churches that have had their ministers come and preach. I'm putting everything in air quotations because I don't count it as valid at all. Dressed in drag. A man dressed up as a woman with an alternate ego inside of a Methodist church preaching. See, I agree, shacking up is a big problem. But we've allowed it to go to this degree. And so now we've gone to this point as a society. And that was done, let's see, probably about 3 years ago. So that's what's happened. And it's throughout churches in not just the United States, in other Western cultures.
We're living in a society that's majority percentage.
Right.
They're increasing in number of Christian believers. And so you're going to have some.
The perilous times that we read about in the New Testament are definitely here. I guess that's what I'm getting at. I agree. Shacking up's an issue. And we need to stand for what's right. We need to stand for absolute truth. We need to say this is what the word of the Lord says, and this is how we're going to base our lives, and this is how we're going to live. And I agree it is wise to protect your testimony. And if those individuals want to try to keep themselves from any potential outside accusation, then I get that. If they have the ceremony, I get that too. But that's the initial issue you brought up. I'm not going to throw a stone.
We invite some of the kids' friends, parents, church, and say, oh no, we was hurt at church. I'm hurt when I get home from McDonald's and all my food ain't in the bag. But I still go to McDonald's, so why can't they still go to church? See, I don't understand that. We was hurt at church. That's just an excuse people use.
And that there's almost like that identity situation, like you were saying. You got to identify as a girl one moment, you got to identify as a guy the other moment. In that certain case, why not just go ahead and say that the history books were wrong and the meteors never fell? I got identified as a Stegosaurus.
Yeah. But we see sin, ultimately, at the end of the day, what we see with all of this has a common denominator, and it is sin. And every human has a sin disorder. David had a sin disorder. His sons had sin disorders. Solomon had a sin disorder. He didn't learn from the issues of his father. When he was established as king and his half-brother makes a play at the throne already before he was established, and then here he is now, it would seem, trying to possibly even sway the hearts of minds of people again by taking the concubine of his father. deceased father, and seeing all this drama unfold. Solomon witnessing the drama that had already occurred with his elder brother Amnon and what he had done by taking his half-sister, and then how Absalom, who was Amnon's half-brother, decided to execute him. And then Absalom makes a play for a throne and forces David out, and there's a rebellion, and there's war, and Absalom's killed, and Solomon witnessed all this. And he didn't sit back and say, you know, we all got different mamas. Maybe I ought not do this. He goes and gets 700 wives and 300 concubines. And then he writes Ecclesiastes. I've tried everything. Ain't none of it going to help you. The only thing you can do is fear the Lord, keep his commandments. At the end of the day, that same lesson rings true for all of us, to fear the Lord and to keep his word. If we have a right placed fear of God, which we ought, then I'm going to recognize he's the creator over me, that there is absolute truth, that he establishes the standards for right and for wrong, and that those are unchanging and unwavering because they originate from God, not from man. And I'm going to base my life on him. And he says for me to base my life on him, then I'm going to turn to his son Jesus, who paid the price for my sin, because I do have a sin disorder and I can't fix it. I'm condemned in it, and I'll end up in hell if I don't repent of it and place my faith in Christ. So if I'll do that, then I can be reconciled to him because of Jesus. And I'll have my life based on him, and I can pursue a relationship with him and learn of him through his self-revelation that is his word. Fear God, keep his commandments. It's still applicable. Personally, I think David would have been wise to avoid having so many wives. It just would have been wise. But hey, that's me. She's here. I can't keep up with one. She keeps up with me more than I would wish. She knows you did that. How do you know I did that? We've got 3 yard apes. How do you know it's me? But she knows.
From what I understand, all of these guys, the concubines and all the wives, and then you read at the division of the kingdoms where Israel, you read every king turned out to be a bad king. Judah and Benjamin, there's some good ones, then they go bad.
Most of them went off, yeah.
And it was all a matter of choice. What God's plan. These things, it was just, it's the choices they made.
And I think it goes back to I think a lot of it can go back to what we're talking about with the issues you've brought to light, buddy, with the issues that others have brought to light. When they did this, it was common practice. It was common practice to have more than one wife if you were wealthy. It was common practice to have more than one wife if you were a king. It was common practice, right? That's cultural assimilation. I'm going to look like the people around me. And that has plagued us, and it has plagued God's people forever. We're going to worship the gods of the people around us. We're going to trust in their gods. We're going to build idols to them. We'll still worship the Lord, but we're going to have our own idols to Baal and to the Ashtoreths and to these other foreign gods that we've encountered. But we'll still go sacrifice to God in the temple, and surely He's going to be okay with that. All this stuff. To those that had means, it would be, because of the associated cost of purchasing a wife for yourself, the paying the bride price, giving the dowry, additionally getting a concubine for oneself, things of that nature possibly. Or if you're a warrior, going and taking from the spoil a slave from a foreign country and making her your wife, you could do that under the law. But I don't know that it was low-level practice. The rich man to pass through the eye of the needle. Yeah. You have everything you want, right? I mean, that's kind of their thought. I can have anything I want. You guys watch those shows, right? I mean, y'all seen them on Netflix or Hulu or Philo or whatever you stream through or watch on Dish or whatever. People that's got all this money. I mean, we grew up in the how many of y'all remember MTV Cribs? I'm going to date some of you. Yeah. Y'all remember? I remember that show coming out. Yeah, there's some smart. Some of y'all are going, I have no idea what that is. That's okay. I've dated you as well now. But that was a show where growing up as a kid, MTV, TV killed the radio star, right? That they had this series where they would take a camera and they would go into the rich and famous' house and they would show them their house, aka their crib. And it was like, yeah, I've got 4 pools out here, and I've got my basketball court inside out here, but I've also got another court out here, and I've got my tennis court, my helicopter pads over here. Look at my kitchen. Now, this is just my kitchen. I've got another kitchen from my chef. That kitchen's over here, but this is the first level. We mostly hang out in the basement. You go down the basement, and there's an entertainment room, and then there's a living room, and then there's a game room, and then there's another kitchen, and there's 5,000 bathrooms, and everything's got marble. And they're like, yeah, and as a kid, we're sitting there going, that's so cool. He's got the coolest house ever. We grew up looking at these people and saying, that's what I want in my life. I want to look like those guys. This is the current culture. And it seemed like they could have anything they wanted. They made us believe that, Kitty. They could have anything they wanted. But you know what? As I got older, I realized they might have whatever they want according to this world, but they don't have what they need. They ain't got Jesus. Because I'm watching people that, ultimately, their salvation between them and the Lord, but some of these people have made proclamations that they don't believe in Jesus. And there are the other ones, their lifestyles really don't show it. They may have whatever they want, but they ain't got what they need. And it's going to be a whole lot better to have what I need than to get all the stuff that I want. Because what's it really going to profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his soul? Right? These guys, they wanted power, they wanted peace, they wanted prosperity, they wanted security for their lineage, they wanted to secure the throne, they wanted all of these things. They wanted to increase their borders, they wanted to increase their trade. You see that throughout the exploits of the kings of Israel. And every time they abandon, and whenever they depart from the wisdom of God and trusting in Him, placing their faith in Him to take care of them, it goes off the rails. It happens in David's life. He sees a beautiful woman. I got to have her. But David's heart was already inclined to having other women. That's what I'm getting at here. He was already inclined to having more than one wife. He was already inclined to having concubines. He was already inclined to, I like Bathsheba. He already had all these other women. Now I'm the king. I can get what I want. It's far greater to have Jesus. Are there any questions or comments? I Kept you a little bit longer than intended. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. You get into those nitty gritty gray areas, right? And say, well, let's unpack it and see what we find. Oh. Sometimes it works out well, and you find some stuff you didn't know, and then other times you're like, wait a second, let's put that back in the box. Just kidding. It's always good to have the discussion. I find it helpful. I find it stimulating to have the discussion and to have to think through and hear from others. So, and it's interesting where you can end up at.
What's fascinating is you look at that as a man is that we're sinful people. We're going to do wrong. We're going to have wrong in our lives. But if we allow God to use us and turn from those ways, God, look how He used David. Look how He used multiple people in the Bible that had wrong in their life, but was able to use them for His glory.
And I think that's what's amazing about God. 2 Samuel 7 is one of the most, I would argue, probably one of the most important chapters in the Scriptures because of its implications through the Messiah and through Christ and its importance. I would argue that. I'm not going to say the most, but I will say one of. 2 Samuel 7 happens before 2 Samuel 11. I want to cheat, double check myself. No, check 2 Samuel 11, okay. 2 Samuel 11 is David and Bathsheba. 2 Samuel 7 is God's covenant with David that he will never lack to have a man on the throne. And that is iterated in the New Testament pointing to Christ and God's promise to keep covenant. Jesus is the ultimate son of David. That's why it's so important and why he is hailed as son of David. It's a messianic title. It's important that he is considered of the line and lineage of David. That's why it's stressed. It's because of 2 Samuel 7. God still keeps his covenant. God still keeps his word, even though 2 Samuel 11 happens. He gave it in 7. David sleeps with Bathsheba in 11. And God still is faithful to his word. And he still establishes a son of David on the throne forever. He uses imperfect people all the time. And even in my best day, I'm still going to come short. Because I'm just human. You're just human. But the beautiful thing about God is he can take your shortcomings and he can make it seem, he can render them unimpactful when your efforts are put forward in faith and full dependence upon God, is what I'm trying to say, if that makes sense. I'm not the most eloquent preacher. I'm not the best speaker in the world. I'm not the most knowledgeable. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm not all these things. But that doesn't mean that God can't use the word spoken on a Sunday morning to reach some lost sinner's heart so that they turn to Jesus Christ. That's a win. That's not because